Hi, my name's Mark, and I'm an actor in gay porno movies, which is what this movie's all about. 10 years ago, gay porno didn't exist. Now we've started documenting our sexuality so that people of the future can see what got us off in the 70s. Well, that's the end of my rap. Time for me to hit the bricks. Goodbye.
I'm Brian Robinson, and I'm one of the programmers of BFI Flare, London LGBTIQ Film Festival. And this year, for lots of reasons, we're having them online. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a boy genius, Evan Purchell, who's going to talk to me, and you're going to listen to him talking about Ask Anybody, which is a collage mosaic of some great moments from porn. Evan, welcome to BFI Flare.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So can you tell us where you first got interested in gay porn?
Yeah, it must have been about 3 or 4 years ago now that my partner and I, we caught a screening of a film called Bijou by Wakefield Pool. And my kind of knowledge of porn history kind of only really extended to like the internet era. I didn't really know anything about anything before that. But that film really kind of blew me away because it's more of an art film than what you would expect for something from that time. And as soon as I saw that, I wanted to see more. So I saw Fred Halstead's, I saw Kurt McDowell's Thunder Crack, I saw Jack DeVoe's Drive. And like as I kept watching more and more of these films, I realized, oh my God, there's something here. Why aren't people talking about this? And that kind of led me like falling down into the rabbit hole of the research and then this film. So.
And how easy was it to get to see a lot of this material? Because the bigger titles are probably fairly easy to see in video on demand or maybe even porn sites.
Mm-hmm.
But there must be, did you have to watch things on VHS or DVD or even 16mm film?
A couple of them I got to see restored versions of. A majority of them, they're on VHS only. When I was working on putting together the film, there are actually a couple of them where I had to pull clips from the trailers because I couldn't find a copy of the actual feature, which shows just how hard to find some of these films are, like even with the internet.
Because it's really true that most film archives don't actually prioritize porn.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be one of the most fragile of all the arts of the cinema. So we in Flare, we had a very special relationship with the filmmaker Peter Jerome.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us the original Super 8s of a lot of his films, which are now preserved for all time in the BFI National Archive collection.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm intrigued about what pleasures there are for you in porn, because you have a boyfriend, you've got the internet, it can't just be about sexual pleasure alone.
I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say the sex wasn't part of it, obviously. But as someone who's like a very big cinephile and who's very interested in the history of queer cinema, what we call queer, I just see these films as being really the beginning of that. For over an entire decade, porn was kind of the only genre that queer filmmakers could make films about their lives and have them be seen by queer audiences and have them turn some semblance of a profit so they could actually go out and make more. That's one reason. And also, these films really kind of document elements of, well, they document kind of fantasized elements of what gay life was at the time. Bathhouses, movie theaters, tea room cruising, the piers, which you were talking about before. All these different elements that you really, there is no other documentation of locations apart from these films.
And I actually find a lot of them very moving because, I mean, there is footage from 1968, which is obviously before most people think that homosexuals existed, that they date the invention of the homosexual to the Stonewall riots in 1969. But there was gay porn being made in 68, 69, and through the earliest parts of the 70s. So I think what you've done is it's a very important kind of archaeological rediscovery, layers of our cultural history that many people are unaware of. So when did you first have the idea of making Ask Anybody?
Well, I've been doing my Instagram feed for about 3 years now. And last year...
What the content of that feed is? It's not cats.
Oh, it's what?
It's not
cats. It's not cats, no. It's I'm very interested in the way that films are marketed and advertised. So the Instagram is mostly newspaper ads, movie posters, publicity photos, magazine covers, really kind of the purpose of which is kind of to show how these films were very central to gay culture of that era. Even very conservative magazines like, say, The Advocate heavily featured gay porn, on covers or full-page ads for movies being played at theaters and interviews and reviews. And the Instagram is kind of uncovering all that and really, really just trying to get the imagery back out there, which has kind of been hidden away in these dusty magazines for decades.
I mean, it is fascinating, the range of materials that are hidden and how much they tell us about how people lived and the culture of gay life. And these films also, could you talk a little bit about the context in which they were shown? Because this is really before home video. In 1968 or 1974, or for a large part of the time that the films were being made, you couldn't see them at home.
You could, but it'd have to be on 8mm, and there'd be no sound, and you wouldn't get any of the story or any of that. But these were movies that were advertised like movies. There were trailers for these movies. They were shown in theaters. As the 70s progress closer to the 80s, the theaters become more just like cruising spots with like lounges behind the screen or in the basement or in the bathroom or things like that. But, in the early half of the 70s, you have this thing called porno chic where people are saying, the future of cinema is porn. And you have all these filmmakers who are saying, we're going to put our lives on screen and part of our lives is sex and part of gay liberation is sex. So we're going to make these films. So really, I mean, a lot of the first like movies about like gay relationships or gay marriage or first coming out stories on film, they're porn films. And it's all kind of part of that.
They are really interesting from a kind of sociological point of view. Is there a film that you love more than any other, would you say, Evan, that just kind of touches a raw nerve within you?
Oh my God,
are they all your babies?
I mean, they're not all my babies because a lot of them just aren't good. But I think in every interview I've done for this, I've kind of talked about a different filmmaker. I talked about Arthur Bresson in one, who I think he's being rediscovered now because of his film Buddies. I've talked about Joe Gage, but really one of the first directors that really caught my eye was Jack DeVoe, who ran the company Hand in Hand Films in New York. He's the one who put out those Peter Jerome films. His second film was really a foundational title for me. It's called Drive, and it's kind of his attempt at making a midnight movie a la John Waters. It's this crazy sci-fi parody about a drag queen who's trying to take over the world by eliminating the male sex drive. And it's a movie that should be like a cult hit, but just hasn't become one because of the sexual content. But I think it's a really fun movie that holds up really well, and I think audiences today would really get a lot out of it.
I mean, DeVoe was really important to Peter Jerome. He didn't only put out the erotic films of Peter Jerome, but he kind of told him what to put in his films. He insisted on a certain level of sexual content. And there's some completely fascinating titles, which I'm not sure we've ever shown, maybe just an extract. Exterminating Angel is a big cult classic that got a lot of followers. But I'm really fascinated by the details in these films because like the fashions, the hair, the mustaches, and I wonder whether you enjoy them as much as maybe your audience do.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of bad fashion in some of these movies, but pretty much. I find it really interesting too how you can kind of trace the development of fashion and gay aesthetic through these films as kind of you move from the late 60s up to the mid 80s. Because by the time you get to the 80s, it's all just like surfer boys and ballet boys and stuff like that, and not really interesting to me. But
so what I'm really interested in as well myself is when we're watching something like this and we weren't born. I mean, I was born, but you weren't born. So how does it feel to kind of negotiate really a world that you've never known? Have you talked to lots of people who are older or who were there? Does it feel strange, or do you feel that you've researched enough to kind of really understand what it was like?
I've talked to some people. I've interviewed some of the directors that their films are represented in the film. But really, I think one of the kind of the initial ideas for putting together was to kind of explore the idea that these films are documentary when they're actually fantasy. So I wouldn't say, I don't think my film is necessarily accurate as documentary, but I think it is kind of accurate as the idealized version of gay life, or the idealized version of what a documentary from that time might be like. And I try to puncture the idea that this is like documentary in the film a few times by cutting to like police raids or actual gay pride marches and things like that, just to kind of show that, you know, this wasn't all as rosy as the film kind of portrays it. If that makes any sense.
It does. It's also interesting, the format of the film, in that it's not a conventional narrative. It's actually a very experimental form, which I can imagine maybe if people weren't that cinema literate, it might be a bit awkward for them. Do you find that people are are desperate for a story, a conventional narrative, or do they just roll with it?
I think so far people have just been rolling with it. It's very hard to like do through lines through like found footage type of films, and I think I was able to do a pretty good job of it. I didn't want it to be like a Tom Anderson film or William E. Jones film with like a quiet voiceover talking about the history of gay porn. I just wanted people to kind of get lost in it and take it as it is, or pull whatever they want from it. And I think the final product does that pretty well.
So when you hear the words porn and gay porn, people think, quite understandably, about sexual acts.
Mm-hmm.
The joy of your film is that it's not entirely composed of sexual acts. Can you talk about the balancing act that the film really has between scenes and the other stuff?
I wanted the explicit material. I knew that material had to be in there because, I mean, what's the point of showing, like, say, the Hudson Piers in New York if you don't show what actually happened on those piers or the types of acts that happened on those piers? But I didn't want the film to get too hung up on material because I didn't want people to get bored. Really, it's maybe a little ironic for someone who deals with this sort of material to say, but I always kind of like teasing audiences. So I think I give just enough to kind of give you an idea of what's going on without ever getting too stuck on anything.
Well, I think it's a very nice balancing act that you have. And for many people, the most erotic thing is the tease. It's the body clothed rather than everything hanging out there.
Yeah. And it's funny because, I mean, you have to remember that all these scenes that I'm pulling from, like 10, 15, 20-minute long sex scenes. And I think it would just be unenjoyable if I was trying to cut together 20-minute long sex scenes out of all these other things. So I think I was able to get a really good balance on it.
Occasionally we have in the festival shown some iconic vintage porn, and it's sometimes a bit uncomfortable when you have a huge cinema screen and a huge penis on the screen, and it kind of looks like a blimp or some kind of alien spacecraft. Don't know what to do, and they start laughing, and when they start laughing, then they can't stop, and it's bad. So I was going to make an announcement to say, please don't titter before your film, to just make sure that everyone was able to enjoy it in the spirit in which it was intended. Can you tell us about the trajectory of the film? Where was your world premiere? And the world has changed a bit since then. And what's the future hold for it?
Yeah, so kind of the impetus for the film was that I was approached by the people who run the Contrast Film Festival here in Austin, Texas, which is a really small little queer film festival, which is it's really nice. They wanted me to kind of put together like a clip show for like an installation event that they were doing, and I actually had an experience with like a film screening, kind of like what you were describing, how people just kind of laughed and like dismissed it and wrote it off and just kind of like walked away, which is why everything is cut together so tightly in my film. I didn't want people to have a chance to immediately dismiss what they were watching as just being, you know, old porn or whatever. So that's kind of the reason that cut together the way it is. But after that, I was really surprised because I thought people would just kind of come in, look at it for a few minutes and then walk away, but people were really into it at the event. So I started pursuing other venues and theaters, and we got a few screenings. The American Genre Film Archive, they picked it up for distribution back in December, and we've been working on getting into more festivals and more one-offs and more screenings. And we've had 8 things get canceled because of coronavirus, which is very sad, but I'm hoping that after things kind of get back to some degree of normalcy, we can get some of those and get it more out there in the world.
Well, it's a kind of timeless piece. I think it will be being watched many years from now.
Mhm.
So is this your first film, really?
I've done editing projects like this before, but never done a feature. So this is technically my first film. Yes, first feature film.
Because I have to say the editing is it's fabulous. I mean, it really works. There's lots of tension. There's lots of interest. It's never boring. Uh,
Mhm.
and was it your background in radio, you think, that gave you skills, or you'd worked with film before?
Oh, I originally went to school for video production. That quickly kind of failed, and then that's how I wound up in radio. So I think my work in radio kind of has helped me with the audio side of things and the audio editing. The soundtrack of the film was kind of a nightmare, trying to pull audio pieces from certain parts of different films and trying to make it all work and make everything sound okay. But really, yeah.
Could you say something about music of gay porn soundtracks? Is it all just library stuff, or were there people actually composing specially for any of these films?
So this is actually one of my favorite things about these films is that there were some that had actual like original music composed for them, but for the most part, these films were so low budget, and the filmmakers knew that nobody would ever admit to going to see them, that they just had no problem with just stealing whatever they wanted, which is why you hear Donna Summer and the Village People and Pink Floyd. There's a lot of Pink Floyd in these movies, and all these other very famous, very well-known songs and pieces of music on the soundtracks of these films, and really recontextualized in really interesting ways. And that's kind of how my film became. Like the soundtrack for my film is what it is. A lot of people ask about that, and I didn't add anything to my movie. It's all taken from the films. So anything you hear on the soundtrack in my film is from the original films.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because I know there's been a kind of rediscovery of a lot of kind of porn soundtrack music, and it's a kind of genre that you find in retro places. But I guess it's just one more of those pleasures that gay porn has to offer.
Oh yeah.
Talking about your knowledge of the context of how the films were received. I mean, there's a lot about it within the film itself, but maybe just explore that.
Sure. I think one of the kind of really early big discoveries for me when I was doing my research was finding out that these films, when they were released, they were treated like films. They were reviewed in gay publications. Even like British publications would send reviewers to New York to go to the Adonis Theater and all these other theaters on what gay porn in New York was like. So through my research, I've kind of found all these articles and reviews and kind of used that as like a basis for my own rediscovery and my own curation of these films.
And before we say goodbye, could you just tell us what your Instagram handle is?
Sure, it's Ask Anybody.
That's good and easy to remember.
Very easy to remember.
Also the name of the film. Mm-hmm. And anyone who's watching now, they should know that BFI Flare Online 2020 is having... Is this a world exclusive that you're offering us online?
It is, actually.
So, yeah, you lucky people out there in the world can see 125 extracts cunningly sewn together by a very talented filmmaker and connoisseur of gay porn. The film is called Ask Anybody, and it will be on the BFI Player as part of BFI Flare. So I think we're going to round up there and say a big thank you for having been with us this afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are, and just say thanks, Evan Purchell, and good luck with whatever you do next.
Thanks for having me. It really means a lot.
Thank you.